My name is Philippe Lalliot, and I'm the French consul in New York City, so I'm your host tonight. And I'd like to tell you that it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you all at the consulate for this World Monuments Fund reception. I would like to begin by praising for their admirable and exceptional work Lisa Ackerman, Executive Vice President, who is with us tonight. I can't see, where are you, Lisa? Oh yes, you are here. And of course Bertrand du Vignaud, President of World Monuments Fund Europe, with whom this evening was organized. As you all know, we are gathered here tonight for a presentation of the Chancellerie d'Orléans, a restoration project concluded last July, I think, by the World Monuments Fund with the French Ministry of Culture. And this evening presentation by Bertrand du Vignaud is very justly named the Rebirth of a Forgotten Masterpiece, for it is indeed considered by the experts to be one of the most sumptuous masterpieces of the 18th century Parisian decor. This mention, as you all may know, this Hôtel particulier, as we say in good French, decorated by Charles de Vailly and by Fergana, among others, will finally regain its last splendor thanks to the fund's restoration work and the relocation of the interior decor to the Hôtel de Rohan-Strasbourg in Paris will indeed allow the public to see this magnificent historical monument after almost an entire century. The efforts undertaken by the World Monuments Fund since, I'm told, the mid-60s for preserving and restoring masterpieces worldwide deserve our full recognition. In France, these efforts, combined with the generous support of many donators, has brought back the lost grandeur to many various yet unique sites, such as le Château de Chantilly, le Potager du Roi à Versailles, the Opéra Comique, and the Saint-Sulpice Church, to name but a few. And I'm always amazed by the list of sites which had benefited from the fund's contribution to their preservation and maintenance, and which are such marvels of our world heritage, the Angkor Temple in Cambodia, the Hercules Temple in Rome, or yet the Luxor site in Egypt, if we were only to mention those three. I'm told that more than 500 sites across 90 different countries, many of which are recognized by the UNESCO, benefit from the fund's work, and so it's very, very impressive. The French architectural heritage is extremely rich, as you all know, and it is thanks to the work and thanks to organizations like the funds, the World Monument Funds, that we will preserve our heritage and allow the public to be exposed to it. And this is why it only seemed natural to me and my team at the consulate to host this evening and to promote this restoration project for the Chancellerie d'Orléans, which would simply not have been made possible without the fund. Un dernier mot en français pour vous remercier tous d'être là ce soir et vous souhaiter une excellente soirée à toutes et à tous sous l'autorité de Bertrand du Vignaud qui va nous raconter presque, je crois, un roman policier ce soir. Merci encore à tous.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Monsieur le Consul General, to welcome us this evening in your beautiful consulate. It's a pleasure for me to be back to this magnificent building on Fifth Avenue, where I've been so many, many times in the past. And I'm very pleased to, this evening, have the chance to talk to you not only about the restoration project, but also a very, very special history, because this is kind of an adventure. You said a roman policier, and that makes the thing very, very interesting. This is not only an 18th century French masterpiece, we are going to see this evening on the screen, but also a very, very interesting sort of international masterpiece, which in the second half of the 18th century was built, commissioned and built and put together by a very leading, prominent group of artists who were very, very, very close one to the other. On the screen, at the moment, you see something which is not the Chancellerie d'Orléans. And I deliberately decided not to show you the Chancellerie d'Orléans for the first minutes of my presentation. It has been in crates for 90 years, so you can wait for 10 minutes before seeing the remains. I thought, why am I showing you this room, which is a panel room, which is magnificent, sort of rococo panel room, which is not quite famous. It is in Paris, it's in the Arsenal Library in the Marais, and the World Monuments Fund had the privilege to restore it to its former beauty 7 years ago. We did that because we got very nervous, we got very excited and nervous and impatient to move forward with the project of the reconstruction and refurnishing of the Chancellerie d'Orléans. What is the Chancellerie d'Orléans? The Chancellerie d'Orléans is actually a small hôtel particulier, as you said, Monsieur le Consul, which was commissioned by the Duke of Orléans, the Régent de France, the Duke of Orléans, in 1704, and it commissioned that building at the very end of its garden, which the palace of the Duke of Orléans family was, the Palais Royal. And the Palais Royal had a huge garden, which now you do not understand really because of the colonnade which was built at the second half of the 18th century. In any case, there were different hôtels particuliers on the right and left-hand side of the garden Palais Royal, and Beaufrand, a very prominent architect of the first half of the 18th century, Germain Beaufrand, built for the Duc d'Orléans and for his mistress, Madame d'Argenton, a very beautiful small hôtel particulier, which was for 25 years property of the Duc d'Orléans. In 1725, the Duc d'Orléans decided to house there his Chancellerie. What does it mean, a Chancellerie, for the Duke of Orléans? The Duke of Orléans they were always very, very important prince in the royal court, and they had a diplomatic relationship with different foreign countries and courts, and he had his own personal business to deal with, and in order to do that, he had his own private chancelier. The chancelier was traditionally a member of the Voyer d'Argenson family. The Voyer d'Argenson was a prominent family in the 18th century. There were different ministers and very high important people, and I'm coming back to that in a minute, but the most important person in that family regarding the Chancellerie d'Orléans was the second Marquis de Voyer d'Argenson. I'm going to talk about him now. The first Chancellerie d'Orléans was actually a masterpiece of the Rocaille period, with wonderful panels, very much in the spirit of the panels of the Arsenal, or in the spirit of the panels we restore at Chantilly. This is the Petite Singerie in the Château de Chantilly, north of Paris, which belonged to the Prince de Condé, Duc de Bourbon. And this is another project which World Monuments supported and inaugurated 8 years ago. And this is to give you an idea of what the first Chancellerie d'Orléans looked like. But in 1762, Marc de Voyer d'Argenson, Marquis de Voyer, decided to completely refurnish and do a completely different building. Doing so, he managed to do probably what was one of the most important hôtels particuliers in Paris in the 18th century. This man was a remarkable man of the age of the Enlightenment. He was not only governor of Vincennes, governor of Touraine, he was the head of the royal stud. And he was a very, very important man in order to introduce in France the English thoroughbred. He crossed the channel many times. He befriended a lot of English people, and he really managed to make the English thoroughbred come to France. He had a very important property near Poitiers, le Château des Ormes, where he had very important stud. And also he had a Chateau d'Asnières in the outskirts of Paris. The Chateau d'Asnières still exists and was the model for the famous house in Newport, Rhode Island, the Elms, which some of you probably know. The Elms is one of the Newport mansion. So Marc de Voyer d'Argenson was also a great collector. He has one of the most important collections of paintings in France in the 18th century, Dutch, Flemish, Italian, French painting, to name them, and he had to sell them. He kept them at the Chateau d'Asnières, and he had to sell them, unfortunately, in one of the most important auctions in the 18th century. He was also a great amateur, and William Chambers, the British architect, I'm going to talk about him later, said that he himself was a great architect. He was an amateur architect. It doesn't mean that he was an architect, but he was extremely close to one of his best friends was Charles de Vailly. Charles de Vailly is bust by Pajot, you see now on the screen, is one of the most interesting architects of France in the 18th century. He's a man who lived in Rome, of course. In those days, they spent a lot of time in Rome, and they went and not to do a grand tour like British amateurs. They were living in Rome, and they studied in Rome at the Academy and things like that. And Charles de Vailly spent many, many years in Rome and was very, very instrumental to bring back to France what we'll later call the neoclassicism style, you see. So this is really, really very interesting to talk a little bit about Charles de Vailly. He was not fortunate enough because most of his buildings didn't survive. They have been destroyed. The Chancellerie d'Orléans has been destroyed, but there is a happy end. Nevertheless, the Château de Montbuzard and many other masterpieces by Charles de Vailly were destroyed. And Charles de Vailly did probably designed one of the most extraordinary interiors of the 18th century. This is the Palazzo Spinella in Genoa in Italy. This was commissioned to Charles de Vailly and made for the Marquess Spinella. Unfortunately, during the Second World War, it was completely bombed and it no longer exists. We still, thanks God, have these wonderful drawings of the Palazzo Spinella. On the screen at the moment, you can really understand some of the features of Charles de Vailly's style. That is to say, this extraordinary play between the shade and the light. You see, of course, this extraordinary bold sculpture coming out of the wall. You see the use of the mirror and the reflection in the mirrors, the balustrades. So those are the features that you will recognize in the Chancellerie d'Orléans or in the Hôtel de Voyer d'Argenson. Charles de Vailly was the architect with Père, his colleague Père, of the theatre of the Odéon, which still exists, but it has been much altered. Also, la Chapelle de la Vierge at Saint-Sulpice Church, and a few other buildings. But I mean, unfortunately, Charles de Vailly is mostly known nowadays by his wonderful drawings more than with his buildings. And when he deserves to be much more famous, and he gathered around him a group of wonderful friends. His best friend was probably the Augustin Pajot. There is no need to introduce Pajot to you because, of course, you are a very distinguished audience. But I mean, nevertheless, I decided to show you one of the Pajot work, for instance, the Foyer, some of the works of Pajot at the Foyer in Versailles, in the Royal Opera, the opera designed by Gabriel, and this is a lovely bust of Pajot at the Louvre. Pajot, Charles de Vailly, they were very, very, very close. And de Vailly designed Pajot's house, destroyed. He designed his own house, destroyed. So we are really going through, unfortunately, many, many buildings which no longer survive. Lagrenet was another artist who worked for the Chancellerie d'Orléans. This is a watercolor kept in Modena in the famous album by Châtelet in the Bibliotheca and Library in Modena of the ceiling of the Queen's Theatre at the Petit Trianon at Versailles, which we also restored and inaugurated in 2001. This is the Queen's Theatre, not the Opera Royale in the main chateau, but the small theatre and the Queen at Trianon. And William Chambers surprisingly also plays a part in that story. William Chambers, the British architect born in Sweden, who was educated in Rome, befriended Charles de Vailly, Pajou, Marc de Voyer d'Argenson, and they were very, very close friends for many years. Thanks God we still have their correspondence, and we still have wonderful interior views and drawings and watercolors that William Chambers did in 1774 when he visited Paris and visited his friends Marc de Voyer, Charles de Vailly, and Pajou. It is remarkable to have 18th century interior views. You see, watercolors of interior were quite popular in the 19th century, and particularly in the second half of the 19th century, and particularly in Russia and Eastern Europe, and also in England. But it's very rare to have interior watercolors of French buildings, and extremely rare to have 18th century view of interiors in the 18th century. And these watercolors by William Chambers are kept in London in the Royal Institute of British Architects, and they are really, really important and will help us immensely for the reconstruction of these masterpiece, which has been unfortunately destroyed. And you see, for instance, on that watercolor, you see the two chairs, and it was wonderful because they allow us to identify the chairs which are on the market at the moment. And so it's very, very important to have these souvenir of the Chancellerie as it looked in 1774. This is the famous dining room. I will explain you the dining room later on. You see the use of the balustrade, you see the mirror, you see caryatides, you recognize some of the features which you saw previously in the Palazzo Spinella in Genoa. It's a much smaller scale, but the boldness and the Roman triumphal spirit of those rooms was absolutely superb. This is another view by Chambers of the courtyard, the facade overlooking the courtyard, and the sort of passageway with a Pajou sculpture, which is now kept at the Louvre. And this is another view, a close-up, and this is the Chancellerie in 1905 or 1906 by Adger. So you recognize the facade. This is the facade on the courtyard, and that is when it's going to be really sad, because this is a view of the same building in 1923. At the World Monuments Fund, we produce every 2 year a list of what we call the most endangered site, and this is really endangered. You see, it's not it's not endangered. It's pathetic. This is probably one of the worst examples of the vandalism of the French bureaucracy and French administration throughout the years, you see. It's very, very, and I have to stop a few minutes to explain you what happened to this building. This building had the misfortune to be located very close to a very important building which is called l'Hôtel de Toulouse or l'Hôtel de Lavrière, which are the headquarters of the Banque de France. In the 1920s, right after the First World War, the Banque de France wanted to really have very important office space and also underground safe to keep the gold reserves of France, and they are still there. In order to do so, they got the permission to destroy a listed building. This building was listed as a monument historique, as a national landmark since the end of the 19th century. And that says a lot, because in order to list a building in the 19th century, it meant that it was extremely important. And it was degraded, put out of the list of the national monument historique, and it was expropriated, and the city of Paris and the Banque de France decided and managed to dismantle it and destroy it. It was a scandal. It would be unfair to say that it was easy process, because there were many, many, many lobbies. The World Monuments Fund is far from being the first organization to really care about the heritage. And in those days, there were many, many, many articles and people were lobbying against these very, very aggressive and very, very, very sad the decision which had been taken. So the Banque de France signed an agreement to keep the remains of the Chancellerie d'Orléans and to rebuild it nearby as soon as possible. In order to do so, they photographed very carefully, very cautiously the interiors of the Chancellerie in 1923, and they destroyed it, dismantled it. They kept everything since then in storage. They never actually stick to their words, and they never really respect their signature. And this has been for 90 years or so hidden as a very serious secret. You know, it was not a complete secret because people who knew about 18th century knew about the Chancellerie d'Orléans, but it was never really mentioned, and it was never really talked about. And those are views which have been taken in 1923, and you see, for instance, this photograph of the Grand Salon, and you see the overdoor by Pajou, which came back to life in about 10 years ago at the time of the Pajou exhibition. You see the doors which are kept in storage, and you see, and you will understand that everything is there. Those are two overdoors which were at the Pajou exhibition, and they are at the moment kept at the Louvre, in the Louvre collection. And I made sure that on the label at the Louvre, they say, well, kept until the Chancellerie d'Orléans will find its final destination. So this is another very interesting detail of the corniche. You see the boldness, you see the richness of the Charles de Vailly conception and design, and you see the only piece of furniture which survive and where we know where it is at the Wallace Collection, on the first landing of the Wallace Collection in London. This is a magnificent, extremely elaborate and luxurious object. It's very tall. The column and the vase were designed by Charles de Vailly and executed by Pajou and his studio. This shows you the lavishness of the whole project, you see, and it shows you that it had such a strong Roman influence, and we are in a very beginning of the neoclassicism. So this is the Chancellerie d'Orléans as it looked for 90 years. That's when I came into the picture. In 1996, I knew about it. I was working at Christie's. I see some of my Christie's colleagues, and I'm very happy to see them in the room tonight. And I thought, this is not possible. This is a huge scandal. And I was really irritated is not the right word, but I thought it was really a tash on the French history. And I asked for a meeting with Monsieur Trichet. Jean-Claude Trichet was at the time governor of the Banque de France. He didn't have a clue who I was. And I asked for a meeting with him, and I asked to talk to him about the Chancellerie d'Orléans. He immediately said, no, don't talk about it. We don't talk about it. This is too embarrassing for words. I said, but Monsieur le Gouverneur, don't you miss my point? You have in front of you one of the most confidential person you will ever meet. I'm not going to talk to anyone at all. I just want to have access to your crates. Could you give me the key of Agnières storage? And he gave me the key of the Agnières storage. And this was really a good thing. And the other really good thing is that I've been associated in a way or another with the World Monument Fund since many years. And I had the great piece of luck to have the World Monument Fund behind me. And I would like to, this evening, to welcome all my colleagues from the World Monuments Fund, who over the years thought I was probably a maniac, because I've been talking about the Chancellerie d'Orléans for so many years, and they were really wonderful, because not only they have been wonderfully supportive, but also they were never really nervous or irritated or anxious. I know very few organizations in the world, private organization, privately funded, will be patient enough to support a project which never takes place, which nothing is happening, but very little is happening. So really, I think that World Monument Fund showed a wonderful patience and over the years. Thanks to Florence Gould donation, we could hire a specialist of 18th century painting, Pierre Jacqui, who is now working with us, and he opened the crates. We opened all the crates. You see that in the crates we still found the straw and the newspaper of 1923. It was an experience. There are 130 crates. It was extremely dirty, you imagine, so it was not an easy process, but we had the great pleasure and great privilege to find remains of an 18th century masterpiece, among them, for instance, those Pajou over-door putti, which nobody has ever seen since 90 years. So we found Pajou, we found really, really wonderful things, and we found that, and we understood very, very, very quickly that we were not talking of panels. There are very few wood panelings in that building. It's mostly stucco work, and it's really mostly sculpture. The walls were sculpted. You see, we are not in the traditional beautiful panel room which I showed you at the beginning, which was the first Chancellerie d'Orléans. This is a second moment when it's like a temple. It's more about sculpture, and the wood are coming into the room and really going out of the wall with this wonderful sculpture. You see, for instance, on the right side of the screen, those details of the voussure of the dining room with the Sphinx, which are extremely present. You see, they are not tiny, they are not frail, they are really bold. And on the left side, there is a statue of Bacchus. And these, now we are moving to the ceiling. The ceiling is a very interesting issue in the Chancellerie d'Orléans. One ceiling is an easy one. This is Jean-Jacques Lagrené's ceiling of Jupiter and Hebe. It was kept. It's a toile marouflée, and it is kept. It's in original gilt wood frame, and it is something which we removed from Agnières, and we are going to start restoring. This is the first one we are going to start restoring. There is another ceiling, which is probably, this is a general view of the Jean-Jacques Lagrené ceiling. This is the most important ceiling of the whole building. This is by Antoine Coipel. C'est Le Combat des Dieux et des Amours. It's probably the most important surviving ceiling by Antoine Coipel, and this is the only remain of the first Chancellerie d'Orléans. We are in 1708, and this was commissioned by the Duke of Orléans because it was absolutely appropriated for a small house, and with the story of the loves and the gods, and it is a very interesting ceiling which has to be studied, and all the preliminary sketches are kept at the Louvre. I would like to tell you that technically it's the worst technical part of the project. It has been completely dismantled. You see, it has been put into different parts and put back together in a kind of gang of metal work and plaster work, which is extremely heavy. And we have commissioned a study, a very technical study, and one thinks that it would be better to keep this kind of gang and to keep it, in order to keep it together. But it has been dismantled already. We commissioned the study to the best restorers, of course. We are working with Cynthia Pasquali. At the moment, she's a star. She's on all the French televisions and media because she is the one who restored the Saint Leonardo, Saint Anne, and I really encourage you to see the very interesting show at the Louvre at the moment. I'm not going to say too many things about the ceiling by Coipel because I see in the room my friend Colin Bailey, so I would be terrified to say stupid things about Coipel, Colin, and I would rather like you to talk about him. And this is Durameau. This is another ceiling by Durameau, which is in a very bad shape. This is a ceiling which was for the bedroom. It's in a very, very bad shape. And then we have the question mark of Fergana. Fergana, this is sure, 100% sure, and it's well recorded that Fergana was commissioned a ceiling for the Chancellerie d'Orléans. But so far, nothing, no remain of it had been found. we are 100% sure that the Banque de France never sold the Fragonard ceiling or never let it to be stolen. They keep the best Fragonard, you know, at the Hôtel de Toulouse, La Fête à Saint-Cloud, and if the Fragonard had been at the Chancellerie in 1923, it would have been kept in the storage of Agnières. So there are different answers to that question. One may be that it was painted over and that the Fragonard being probably no longer considered fashionable, as it was the case with the famous story of the frick panels. Coming from Louvciennes, you know, Madame du Barry changed her mind, and then she commissioned Vien. It may be the case that because of its different story, a ceiling, if it was painted in plasterwork, you see, it wouldn't be so easy to remove. So they probably the Fragonard is still underneath, behind the Durameau. Maybe this is a possibility. We are going to have X-ray, we are going to have the best test, but there is no evidence of the Fragonard so far in the remains of the Chancellerie d'Orléans. No evidence on the photograph taken, no evidence on the remains, so we are a little bit disappointed because we love to have a Fragonard, but at the moment there is no Fragonard, but we will make our best to find a Fragonard. In any case, it's a wonderful ceiling by Coipel, which will be one of the glories of these beautiful buildings. Those are details of the Coipel ceiling. And you see, it's very easy to understand how they managed to cut it, but it's very, very easy to put it back together. And those, I've decided to show you two preliminary sketches of this wonderful work by Coipel, which are kept in the Louvre, which are really famous. And then I show you the plan of the house. The house was not a big house. We are not talking of big house at all. It was a small hôtel particulier between the courtyard and the garden. You see the passageway, then the courtyard, then you see the 5 rooms. 3 rooms are overlooking the terrace and the garden. So basically, there were 2 antechambers, and there was 1 bedroom, 2 grands salons, and the dining room. We are talking of 5 rooms, less than 300 square meters, but very high ceiling, very, very important proportion for a small house. This was difficult to convince, very difficult to convince the French authorities in charge, and I thought at some stage it'd be better to have a model. Because it's a long story. You have to hear it because you are stuck in that room. But many of the people I met were not. And after 2 minutes or 3 minutes, they just gave up, you see, and they just say, what is this boring long story? So I thought that it'd be better to have a model, because a model is very easy to understand, and in 2 seconds you understand. So we commissioned a model, scaled model, which was supported by a grant from the Crest Foundation. And this model really allow me to make the different ministers of culture and different Banque de France high people to understand what it was and what we were talking about. Because if you write reports and reports after reports, they don't read the reports and they say, oh, this is always this boring story. But the model actually speaks by itself, you see. And the model, which I encourage you to come and see when you come to Paris, because we keep it in our headquarters in the Hôtel de Talleyrand, is really something which helps us to convince different people. But one of the key problems of the Chancellerie was where to put it back, was the venue. And I thought that maybe the most appropriate place may be a magnificent 18th century building which belonged to the French Minister of Culture and which at the moment is occupied by the Archives Nationales. In the heart of the Marais in Paris, you know, there are 7 18th century hôtels particuliers which belong to the Archives Nationales, and many of them have been commissioned and built for the family de Rohan. L'Hôtel de Rohan-Soubise is more famous, was built by Beaufranc, and the interior are famous, and rightly so, because of the wonderful interiors. The bedroom of the Princesse de Rohan-Soubise is one of the best 18th century interiors in Paris, period. And the Hôtel de Rohan-Strasbourg, which was nearby, you see the Rohan, they were Cardinal of Strasbourg, so that's why this hotel bears the name of the city of Strasbourg, but it has nothing to do with the city of Strasbourg. It's actually the Bishop of Strasbourg, or the Prince of Rohan. This is an hotel which was built by De la Mer. De la Mer was a very important architect also from the same period. De Rohan was more or less the equivalent of the Voyer d'Argenson. I thought that there will be the same kind of volume inside, the same height, the same number of windows, and the sun will come back into the room exactly from the same direction that it came to the Hôtel de Voyer d'Argenson, to the Chancellerie d'Orléans. Those are views of the interior of the Hôtel de Rohan-Strasbourg at the moment. The good fortune, the good piece of luck, is that if I may say so, is that the ground floor of the Hôtel de Rohan-Strasbourg has been completely destroyed. The interior had been destroyed under Napoleon, under the time of Napoleon, when it was the Imprimerie Nationale, Imprimerie Impériale. The first floor still keeps wonderful decor, including a singerie by Huet, like the one I showed you previously at Chantilly. But I mean, the ground floor doesn't have any decor at all, and so that's why it fits perfectly well to accommodate the 5 rooms of the Chancellerie d'Orléans. We are now almost there after 15 years, and you see, this is the facade overlooking the garden of the Hôtel de Rohan-Strasbourg. Basically, the rooms will be the Grand Salon, the bedroom, and the dining room will be in the center, and for the antechamber, we'll still have to take the decision whether or not we put it on both sides or in the interior of the Hôtel de Rohan-Strasbourg. The French Ministry of Culture put together an executive committee, a scientific committee. We gathered already both of them 2 weeks ago, and we have started to work on the decision, a very interesting art history and architectural decision to be taken in order to move forward with this project. But as you said, Monsieur le Consul, the key moment was when we signed a protocol. World Monuments Fund, the Governor of the Banque de France, and the Minister of Culture, Frédéric Mitterrand, we signed together a protocol on July the 11th last year, which was really the moment when we understood that we could not go backward, and this was really, really something which would go forward. The Chancellerie d'Orléans project so far, as I told you, has been entirely funded by World Monuments Fund through the support of the Robert Wilson Challenge, the Gould Foundation, the Crest Foundation, and the Sales Foundation. It's entirely thanks to this American support that this French project now is coming to a moment where it's going towards completion. The current situation, I'm sure you are going to ask me, when are we going to see it? Because you didn't see it for 90 years, but now you are probably very eager to see it. So the idea is that the Archives Nationales are moving out of the Hôtel de Rohan-Soubise and the Hôtel de Rohan-Strasbourg. So they are moving their documents and archives to go to a new, very state-of-the-art building, which has been built in Pierrefitte, in the outskirts of Paris. And this process will take place in 2012. We think that in 2013, we are going to be able to bring to the Hôtel de Rohan-Strasbourg the first remain. In the meantime, we are going to start restoring bits and pieces, but of course we are not going to restore everything because it has to be reassembled and harmonized on the premises. This is the most exciting and the most interesting part of the project. The 15 or so years of negotiation, bureaucratic and different things, different negotiation I had and discussion were not always fun. Sometimes they were, sometimes they were not. I had almost 500 meetings to achieve to arrive to this solution. I met 3 governors of the Banque de France. I met 9 ministers of culture, and it has been a pleasure to discover them and to see their reaction. I must say that very often I wonder why no organization had done it before, including the French government. Because we are talking of something, again, which was rather famous, extremely important, and it would not be fair to say that there were no tentative to do it. There was one at the Louvre, but I know that Michel Laclaude turned it down. There was one at Carnavalet, and Monsieur de Montgolfier turned it down, and they were different. But I had a discussion with Jacques de la Rosière, who was a former governor of the Banque de France, a few weeks ago. And he's a very, very well-read person, very educated, and he was extremely pleased that eventually this is going to an end. I cannot tell you how the Banque de France is pleased, and Monsieur Noyer is extremely pleased. But I think myself, I'd like to have your view. It's because it's an 18th century building. I think this is the answer. I think that in nowadays, the politician, the people in charge, because it was 18th century, they did not consider that it was important enough. I know that in that very room, everybody loves 18th century. I know that in that room, I would have to convince no one at all. But I can tell you that in the French high decision maker, if it had been a 20th century interior, if it had been a decor by Picasso or someone like that, I'm sure that the decision would have been taken ages ago, and would have been put together, back together, ages ago. I'm not saying that people do not pay any attention to the 18th century. On the contrary, you know that Versailles and very famous places get a lot of funds and attention. But I'm saying that such a strange thing, a strange and difficult project, and Jacques de la Rosière agreed with me that it was probably because it was not the fashion of the time. That's it. Wouldn't be at the time of the age of Newport Mansion. I think that people would have died to put it back together and to its former glory. But I think that in the second half of the 20th century and beginning of the 21st century, 18th century, unfortunately, or I don't know, is no longer what it used to be. And I think that it's a wonderful piece of luck that two masterpieces, the interior of the Chancellerie d'Orléans and the Hôtel de Rohan-Strasbourg, are going to be to meet and to be linked forever. We have to make sure, nevertheless, and we will make sure, and the Banque de France will make sure, that it is properly open to the public and managed. I don't want to go into too many technical detail, but as I told you previously, this building has been degraded, delisted. It's no longer a monument historique in order to be destroyed. And it's not a property of the French state, it's a property of the Banque de France. So in the protocol, which we signed on July the 11th, 2011, we stated that the Banque de France will give it to the French government at the very end of the work, and it will be classified again, it will be a monument historique again at the very end of the work, and the work will be under the maîtrise d'ouvrage déléguée of the World Monuments Fund. So we are going to control the work with, of course, the appropriate architect en chef. We selected Monsieur Barnoux, who is an architect en chef we like very much, and be working together very nicely. And this is something which will be back and will be a property of the government only at the very end of its reconstruction and of its reassembly. So I hope I've been clear in that, because this is a very complex issue and fascinating, but nevertheless very difficult process. So I thank you very much, and if you have any question, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you very much.
On behalf of World Monuments Fund, thank Bertrand very much. We've all very much eagerly awaited this project, and I will say that I had the privilege to work at the Crest Foundation when we made the decision to fund the model, and now I have the enormous privilege to be your colleague at World Monuments Fund, and hopefully we'll all be celebrating the return of this glorious interior to a very fine building. And I wanted to invite questions for Bertrand. Or if he's left everybody speechless, to invite everybody to have a drink and then ask Bertrand privately.
I have a question regarding Fergana. I I've got a question regarding the Fragonard. Could it be that, I don't know, it was stolen during the Second World War by Goering or someone like this?
No, this is a good question. But I mean, during the Second World War, the German didn't open this storage in Asnières, so it was really kept. This is something that the Banque de France did very well, actually. They kept it extremely well. There was no humidity problem. It was not, I mean, you can tell when you see the paper, you see the wood, and you see the straw. It was really, really dry. And all the crates, all the inventory coincide. So there is no. It's in 23 that we don't see a Fragonard. Nowadays, it's obvious that there was no Fragonard at Asnières, because in 23 it would have been listed in the inventories. But in the 18th century, Colin, I don't know what your opinion on that, but I mean, in the 18th century, it is absolutely well recorded that Fragonard was commissioned as ceiling for the Hôtel de d'Argenson.
Fragonard painted the bedroom ceiling.
Yes.
He was the first artist to be commissioned to paint in that room. It went up, and he had bad luck. They didn't like it. Devailly writes to Voyer d'Argenson, who's in London, and says, Monsieur Fragonard's ceiling is up, Monsieur Duromeau's ceiling is up, everyone likes Monsieur Duromeau's ceiling more. So Fragonard had the indignity in 1772 of, as you pointed out, the marc-rene ceiling replacing his. And it's a fascinating question that you've raised as to whether or not the Fragonard may have been returned, just as Madame du Barry returned our pictures to him at the Frick, and the Fragonard may one day reappear. What was wonderful for me to see, having worked on a little bit on this, was the ceiling in the place itself, the sort of scale of it, the dimensions of it, and that will give Fragonard scholars a really important indication of what they should be looking for.
What do you think? You think Lagrenet didn't paint it over the Fragonard? This is not possible.
I think if it's Toile Marouflé, I think he would have.
I
think he would have had the canvases in his studio. He would have painted, and they would have put it up.
Thank you, Colin.
Well, if there are no more questions, I'm going to thank everybody for coming and thank the Consul General for hospitality this evening and invite everybody to have a drink and perhaps ask Bertrand some questions privately.
Thank you.
Thank you.